Yeah, about Swiss banking. See, the problems with Swiss banking really started in 2012 when the Obama administration basically strong-armed the Wegelin Bank or Wegelin Bank, which is a private bank in Switzerland, strong-armed them into revealing their client list because they wanted to take care of American tax dodgers. And see, that's when the Swiss banking laws were corrupted. They were threatened. Wegelin Bank was threatened with removal from SWIFT, and so they had to. The Obama administration used the international system that was based in the United States to pursue a short-term political agenda, because the SWIFT had never been used as a threat against any bank in order to achieve some politically useful end for the United States government. See, the United States relentlessly pursued American tax dodgers in Switzerland, but they never resorted to this sort of blackmail, which the Obama administration was the first to do in 2012 against Wegelin. And what happened that because of that, Wegelin eventually went broke because of it, and because everybody pulled out their money. And more to the point, the Swiss banking system basically said, we will not take American customers anymore. Okay, that was their response. They acquiesced to the Americans on the one hand by revealing the names of all American citizens that had accounts in Switzerland, but at the same time they removed the problem by basically saying we're not going to take American customers anymore because of this issue. Okay, and so therefore, you know, the American government, what's it going to say to Switzerland? Give me the name of other people on your client list. At that point, the Swiss, rather than start turning decisively away from the Americans, at least, they kind of like continued on as if things were normal. But as Angelo said, that's when Swiss banking started going down the tubes, because other countries started realizing, hey, you know, maybe the Americans will strong arm them again if I'm Saudi, if I'm Russian, if I'm Chinese, if I'm whomever, of a targeted country or a targeted people. The American administration, which had, I mean, the United States created the SWIFT system in the post-war period. It was a very useful system in terms of banking messaging in order to transfer funds quickly. To Alex's point, which was the whole point of, or Angelo's, I forgot, the point of like the Rothschilds transferring money from one country to the other. That was the point of it. It was a bedrock system that undergirded the American system of exporting its debt and bringing in foreign monies so as to live high on the hog by way of credit, which is what the United States and the West generally has been doing for the last 40 years. But see, by weakening SWIFT for short-term political gain, as the Obama administration did in 2012 and subsequently, and especially now with the sanctions, where the Russian central bank's assets were frozen. I mean, this is major, right? And Ursula von der Leyen is saying that they have to figure out a way legalistically to steal those assets and give them to Ukraine, which is, the Zelensky regime are a bunch of corrupt thugs, for crying out loud, right? Well, all of this makes the rest of the world lose confidence in the American system. And this is catastrophic for the Americans and the West in general for two reasons. Number one, the West depends on getting cash from the rest of the world to support its social welfare programs and its defense spending, number one. And number two, the rest of the world's economies are catching up. And in terms of purchasing power parity, the rest of the world is larger than the West. And so, I mean, in nominal terms, perhaps not. In purchasing power parity, yes, and by other more sophisticated measurements of an economy, most definitely. And so what you have is that the Americans, by a short-term approach to using the tools at hand, has weakened confidence in the rest of the world in the Western financial system. And so the only way out for the West, for the European Central Bank, the Swiss Central Bank, and most especially of all, the Federal Reserve, they're going to have to just print money. And this money eventually is going to make its way into the real economy. And you're going to have a loss of faith in the dollar. The dollar, in the path that we are going now, it is inevitable that it will hyperinflate and eventually become worthless. It is inevitable because this process that I've outlined, this is the exact same process that has happened in every country that has hyperinflated. They lose the ability to get credit from overseas for whatever reason. They start printing to make up the difference, and that printing works for a while until all of a sudden people start realizing, hey, this currency I have in my hand, it's really not worth anything. I can clean my butt with it, but little else, because so much of it is floating around and sloshing around to shore up the liabilities that the financial sector has of this particular country. This is going to.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up SWIFT, and it's an ecosystem of processes, systems, the dollar, the way that money moves around. This has all been dominated by the West, but more recently it's been weaponized by the West. And everyone is looking at each other and saying, well, they're doing it to Russia. We're pretty sure China's next. China's our biggest trade partner. This is toxic. This is not a system that is worth being a part of. And we saw efforts to create alternatives for years and years now, since this has all been going on. So we're going counterclockwise. I want to throw this to Alex first. Sure. Banking and finance, this is all supposed to serve the economy, but it feels as if people have hijacked it first, almost to create a casino out of it, to create wealth out of doing nothing, but also weaponizing it. And I think either one is bad enough, but they're doing both right now. And it almost seems desperate at this point, especially the weaponization. What do you think about that? And because you're based in China, we were talking about Russia. What impact is this going to have on China, do you think?
Well, that's a two-part question, so I'll answer the first part. First of all, banks don't really care about your deposits. It's very clear. They don't need your deposits as well. Just by the announcement this morning that a lot of these banks are backstopped, basically bail-ins, not really necessary a bailout, but it's a bail-in. So, for example, during the crisis, the banks just say, yep, been a bad boy, in a little bit of trouble, give me some cash. Money flows in there. Depositors, well, you're protected up to X amount of money in each country. Each country has their own kind of protection. The average customer was pretty much, blown out of the banking business many years ago. You're just a person that is there to use their services, which you pay for, whether it's credit cards, 1-3% or whatever. That's all you are to a bank. The good old days when you used to take that jar of pennies and nickels in to get money and put it in your bank account and gain interest, that's a long gone. I mean, a great memory, a beautiful thing to have. But how you can win against this is purchasing things like, and I'm going to sound like a gold bug here, but it's starting to make a lot more sense. I've been buying gold now for the last 14 years, as much as I can, when I can, averaging it out. And once again, this is not a solicitation to buy or sell anything, but all I'm going to say is that if you have something that you can hold, that they're not going to lock the door on, somebody's not going to answer the phone if you need to wire out money when banks are collapsing. Can you imagine that? Why did not most of these Silicon Valley companies that had billions in these accounts, Roku's just a general, we'll call it a high-tech company or maybe a streaming service, 26% of their assets are sitting in a bank in cash. I mean, who is working for Roku in the compliance department where they could set some of these assets? And let me give you an idea of what I mean by that. Is if you have cash in the bank, yes, if a bank gets wiped out, it's gone.
Additional to that, I think this is an interesting discussion. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Michael Hudson. He was a gray zone, and he gives a very good explanation on when it comes to the dollar hegemony and the Ponzi scheme. It's important to understand, for people to understand, that in reality the dollar hegemony is a Ponzi scheme. The system of the US, the way they design it, can work as long as you have countries or corporation that keeps investing into US debt, because in reality it's like a Ponzi scheme. If people, countries, they stop investing to US debt, then the whole system fall apart. So you see, in reality, I think Russia and China very early on, probably a decade ago, they already started, quote unquote, declaring war on the collective West, not by weapons, not kinetic, but that was actually on the currency. What is happening, the sanctions, what we saw those days with Ukraine, that's something very small compared to what they started earlier on.